I was kicked out of the house for getting seconds and discovered a new path that changed everything. I spent my entire life taking care of others, putting my family's needs above my own. When I became a widow, I went to live with my son, believing I would be welcomed with the same affection I had always offered. But one day, upon getting a second helping of a meal I had prepared myself, everything changed. I was humiliated, rejected, and expelled from the house I thought was my home. On that cold night I thought my story had ended. But that was where a new chapter began. Today I am proof that even the deepest pains can lead us to unexpected paths, and surprising ones. I am very happy that you are here. Follow my story to the end and comment the city you are watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. The kitchen was filled with that familiar smell of homemade seasoning, the same one I prepared for decades for my son. The sound of the pot bubbling and the clinking of silverware brought me a silent comfort. I felt useful and necessary even if it was just to prepare dinner. Peter had had a hard day at work and Emily seemed distant as always. I prepared his favorite dish, beef stroganoff with rice, and put a little extra cream just how he liked it. As I placed the plates on the table, I took a deep breath. The small ritual of calling everyone to eat reminded me of the times when he was a child. Emily came first, looking sideways at the full platter. Peter sat in silence, messing with his cell phone. I smiled, trying to start a conversation, but received only one-word answers. It didn't matter, I thought. What mattered was being close to them, being part of the routine. After everyone served themselves, I sat down last and took a small second portion. After all I had cooked, it wasn't fair to eat just a little. When I raised the first forkful to my mouth, Emily stopped chewing. Her eyes went straight to my plate, as if I had committed a crime. She looked at Peter and then made a comment that would change everything. I froze. Everything seemed normal. Until that shameful moment. "Do you really think you need seconds, Martha?" Emily said in a harsh tone. "This isn't a buffet." For an instant I thought she was joking, but she continued. "You have already eaten enough, don't you think?" My stomach turned, but not because of the food. Peter looked up from his cell phone, confused. Instead of defending me, he furrowed his brow. "Mom, Emily is right. No need to exaggerate." It wasn't about the food, and I knew that. It was about the silent annoyance she felt due to my presence, for taking up space, for existing there. I took a deep breath, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to come. So many years dedicated to caring, to giving my time, my body, my soul. For this? To be treated like a hindrance at the table I prepared myself? My heart tightened. Peter stood up, as if he wanted to end the discussion. "Mom, I think we need to talk later. About boundaries." Boundaries? The word hit me like a slap. I, who gave up everything to raise him with dignity, now needed permission to serve myself twice? I looked at him, searching for some trace of the boy who used to run into my arms, but I only found coldness. I could not believe what I was hearing from my own son. The conversation didn't end there. When Emily went to the bedroom, Peter came back with a different tone. He said that my constant presence caused tensions in the marriage. That perhaps it was time for me to find my own space. I was paralyzed. He spoke as if I were an unwanted guest, not the mother who raised him alone after his father's death. The words came sharp, dressed in rationality, but they pierced my soul. "You need to understand that this is my house now," he said. "There are rules. And mutual respect." I wanted to scream that it was I who respected, who remained silent in the face of small humiliations, crooked glances, cold silences. But I said nothing. I just stood up, trembling, trying to find words that never came. And he concluded, "It will be better for everyone if you pack your things." There was no argument. There was no apology. Only the sound of silence and the smell of the food getting cold on the table. I grabbed my pot, my only companion in that moment, and headed toward the door. The living room seemed colder, as if there was no longer a place for me there. Peter did not follow me. Emily didn't even leave the room. Only the creak of the door opening. I left with the pot still hot in my hands, aimless and homeless. The streets had a different smell at night, a mixture of fear, humidity, and loneliness. I walked without knowing where I would go, the hot pot starting to cool in my trembling hands. I sat on a park bench near my old house, as if I still belonged to that neighborhood. The air cut my skin and the silence around only echoed the words I heard hours before. Getting seconds. How could that have been the reason? I stayed staring at nothing, the streetlights flickering as if they were mocking my situation. The tears, which I held back during the entire argument, finally flowed. I felt ridiculous. How did I reach this point? How did I not notice the signs before? The small attitudes, the whispers, the impatient looks. Everything was a warning. I simply insisted on believing that there was still space for me there. My mind replayed every second of that dinner as if I could go back. Would it be that if I hadn't served myself again? But what kind of mother is rejected for wanting to eat one more spoon of food made by herself? The shame wasn't just for the act, it was for the conclusion. I was a burden, a nuisance. My hands began to tremble. My hands were trembling, but it wasn't just from the cold. That was when I saw a light turn on in the house next door. The upstairs window opened and a silhouette observed me. I tried to shrink away, thinking they would send me away, but no. A soft voice called my name. Mrs. Martha? It was Grace, my neighbor from the house next door. She came down in quick steps, in slippers, a coat over her nightgown. When she got close and saw me with swollen eyes, she dropped everything and sat beside me. She didn't ask questions. She just held my hand. We stayed in silence for a few seconds, and I, for the first time that night, felt a little bit of welcome. Grace looked at the pot in my lap and smiled sadly. Let's go inside. It's too cold out here. I hesitated. Shame held me back. But she insisted firmly, like someone extending a bridge where there was only an abyss. Come, you are not going to sleep on the street tonight. Grace's house smelled like fresh-baked bread and peace. I entered like someone stepping on holy ground, afraid of breaking something. She offered me hot tea and clean blankets. She said I could stay in the guest room without rush, without explanations. I thanked her with watery eyes, because the words still wouldn't come out. I didn't remember the last time someone took care of me like that. The first days were of silence and much shame. I avoided leaving the room. I didn't want to disturb. I didn't want anyone to know. Grace made me feel comfortable without invading. Sometimes she left notes with kind words, or a coffee waiting on the table. It was hard to accept that gesture of kindness after so much contempt. I thought I didn't deserve it anymore. Even so, little by little I began to breathe better. The pain was still there, but there was space for it to be heard instead of silenced. I looked out the window and saw my son's house, so close and at the same time so distant. The food was getting cold inside the forgotten pot in Grace's kitchen. But inside me, something was beginning to warm up. I didn't know it, but a new friendship was being born there. The morning was cold when Grace called me to accompany her to the community center. I hesitated, still feeling fragile and out of place. Just to see the space, she said, with a smile that demanded nothing. Inside, everything in me screamed that that place wasn't for me. I didn't want to be seen as just another broken woman. Still I went, because staying where I was meant hiding. The building was simple, but there was something welcoming in the movement of the people entering and leaving there. Some carried bags of food, others just discreet smiles. Grace introduced me as her friend, and that touched me more than she could imagine. For the first time in days, I felt part of something. But even so, I walked with timid steps, like someone invading a territory that doesn't belong to them. We entered through the side door, and Grace took me to the kitchen. Inside, a gentleman with a firm voice and attentive eyes commanded everything with silent authority. "Leonard, this is Martha. She cooks like no one else," Grace said. I felt awkward, murmuring that I only cooked the basics. Leonard looked me up and down, then said, "We are needing someone like that around here." My heart skipped a beat. I didn't want to depend on charity, but I had no choice. I returned home in silence. The idea of working there stirred something in me. I always cooked out of love, out of care, never out of obligation. But Grace encouraged me. "Maybe this is what you need right now, a place to reconnect." The next day I returned to the center, still unsure. Leonard welcomed me with an apron in his hands and a look that said, "You belong here." I took a deep breath and accepted. I started by helping with the vegetables. My hands, which trembled days before, cut with precision. That automatic gesture brought memories of the time I prepared lunchboxes for Peter to take to school. Suddenly the past didn't seem so distant. It was there, pulsing in the seasonings, in the textures, in the aromas. Leonard watched me without saying anything, just noting every detail. Maybe he also recognized that silent pain. On the third day, he approached and said, "You can lead today. I trust you." I stood static. Led? I had barely regained control of my own life. But he insisted, and there was something in the way he spoke that made me believe that maybe, just maybe, I was capable. I grabbed the ladle and went to the stove. The pots awaited me like old friends. Cook again? I didn't know if I was ready. In that environment, voices mixed with the sounds of pots and the discreet laughter of the volunteers. The food smelled like memory. Each dish served felt like a hug. And I began to realize that perhaps my story still had room for more chapters. Still, sometimes I caught myself crying softly, remembering the meals I made for Peter, the family dinners that now seemed so distant. While stirring a pot of stew, an elderly lady thanked me with teary eyes. She said it had been days since she ate something so tasty. Her words hit me like a bomb, cleaning a little of the accumulated pain. There, for the first time in a long time, I felt I could contribute, even broken, even under reconstruction. It wasn't charity, it was an exchange. I gave and I received. Grace passed by me and squeezed my shoulder. "See? You still have a lot to offer." And I smiled, with my heart still wounded but beating. The community kitchen wasn't an end. It was a new beginning. One that I hadn't asked for, but that perhaps was what I needed. I continued stirring the pot, looking around, trying to believe that all that was real. But there was something in that place that gave me hope. The next morning, my old cell phone started vibrating nonstop. Messages, notifications, screenshots. Not understanding, I asked Grace for help, who took the device and froze. She showed me a post made by Emily. A sequence of photos of me cooking at the community center, accompanied by cruel captions. "While some work, others take advantage. Freeloading has a name." My face displayed, my past distorted. I felt the ground disappear. Soon came the comments. People laughing, others judging, some saying that I always seemed like a moocher anyway. The internet was becoming a court, and I was the accused without the right to a defense. I cried like I hadn't cried in days. How did she manage this? How did she have the courage? That woman kicked me out and now stained my dignity in front of strangers. My heart, which was beginning to rise again, collapsed once more. I went back to the community center quiet, like someone carrying public shame. I pretended nothing had happened, but I felt the looks, some supportive, others curious. Leonard called me to talk, but I said everything was fine. A lie. Inside me, everything hurt. I thought about giving up, leaving everything, going back to nothing. Because being humiliated by one's own family was something I still didn't know how to face. The entire internet seemed to be laughing at me. That afternoon, an elegant woman entered the community restaurant. She dressed simply, but had a look that pierced through the layers of pain I was hiding. "I am Charlotte, a social worker," she said. "May I sit?" She didn't come with questions, she came with presence. We talked for minutes that seemed like hours. I spoke about what had happened, about the eviction, about the shame that consumed me. She listened to me without interrupting. When I finished, I was in tears. But Charlotte just took my hand with firmness and sweetness. "I believe in you." Those words, spoken with such certainty, broke down a wall I didn't even know still existed. For the first time since that night, someone looked at me not as a victim or a burden, but as a woman. A wounded woman, yes, but whole. She said she had already seen stories like mine. That it isn't always the one who shouts the loudest who is right. That being judged by the internet is not a definitive sentence. She offered me guidance, support, and most importantly, emotional backing. I allowed myself to breathe deeply. Maybe I wasn't as alone as I imagined. Maybe the world still had room for empathy. She held my hand and said, "I believe in you." In the days that followed, Grace and Charlotte became an invisible shield around me. They helped me respond to the attacks, to organize my version of the story with dignity. Leonard was also firm, supporting me in front of the volunteers, reinforcing that the restaurant was a place of welcome, not judgment. Every gesture of theirs strengthened me. Little by little, I recovered the courage to look people in the eyes. I continued cooking, and with every meal, a piece of my soul was restored. I started smiling again, even if discreetly. The cruel comments still existed, but now they didn't define me anymore. Charlotte taught me that my truth was more powerful than any slander. Grace showed me that bonds of true love do not depend on blood. Going back to work, even hurt, was an act of resistance. It was my way of saying that I was still here, that I wouldn't surrender to cruelty, that I deserved to start over. When I distributed the plates that weekend, I felt a new peace inside me. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was reconstruction. And that was already a lot. Maybe I still had something to offer the world. That morning I woke up with a vivid memory. My mother stirring a copper pot of guava paste in the backyard. That awakened a sweet, almost painful longing in me. I went to the community restaurant with her image still alive in me, and decided to try something different. I took simple ingredients as I used to do when Peter was small. I created a dish inspired by my childhood. Baked rice with shredded chicken, golden cheese, and a touch of guava paste in the bittersweet sauce. Leonard watched me from afar, curious. I mixed the flavors with the care of someone molding memories. It wasn't just a meal. It was a story I wanted to tell with every forkful. When the platter was ready, the smell took over the kitchen and invaded the hall. My fingers trembled slightly as I arranged the plates. It was just food, I repeated to myself, but I knew it was more than that. When it was time to serve, I took a deep breath. I didn't know how people would react. It was something out of the ordinary, and I still didn't feel completely secure to be bold. But as I placed the first plates on the counter, I saw curious looks and immediately after smiles appearing. It was a simple dish, yes, but loaded with affection, with roots, with a part of me I had almost lost. When I served, my hands were trembling. The reactions started shyly, but soon the comments spread. What a different flavor. It tastes like home. I never ate anything like this. The hall was noisier than usual, in a cheerful and comforting tone. People came back for seconds, and I stood there, half in shock, half emotional, washing dishes with a smile that escaped even without intending to. Leonard approached in the late afternoon and called me to talk. He was direct. This dish was a success. I am organizing a special event for the neighborhood, and I want you to lead the kitchen. I stopped breathing for a few seconds. Led? Me? His words danced in my mind as if they were in another language. You have talent, Martha. And more than that, you have soul. I was left without an answer, just with a racing heart. I returned home thoughtful. Grace was thrilled with the news, encouraging me to accept. But inside me the doubt still screamed. What if I failed? What if it was all luck? Deep down I knew that insecurity still paralyzed me, but something was also starting to push from inside. A timid courage, but alive. That night I slept little. I thought about the event and everything it signified. Me? Led? I've never done that before. The next morning, I faced my reflection with more firmness. I could be afraid, but I could no longer live in its shadow. I went back to the community center and gave my answer. Yes, I accept. Leonard smiled like someone who already expected that. We started planning the menu together, and for the first time I saw myself giving ideas, suggesting seasonings, leading a team. The kitchen was now my stage, my harbor, and my cure. The following days were intense, full of tests and preparations. But there was a new joy in the air, an enthusiasm that moved me. Grace helped me at home with everything she could, and Charlotte promised to attend on the big day. Between tiredness and anxiety, I felt I was becoming someone I never imagined being. A woman of initiative, of value. I was no longer just a cook. I was someone capable of inspiring. The voices that previously humiliated me still echoed, but now there were others above them. Voices of encouragement, of recognition, of affection. I still had fear, yes, but this time I didn't let it decide for me. I stood up. I went. Because, in the end, running from myself only led me back to pain. And I wanted more than to survive. I wanted to live. I could no longer run from myself. The day of the event arrived like a silent storm. I woke up early, reviewed every ingredient list, walked through the kitchen before anyone else arrived. Little by little, the volunteers started coming in, excited, asking what to do. I gave orders, discreet but firm. Something in me had changed. Even exhausted, I felt alive, pulsing. It was as if every pot on the fire was also warming my spirit. The hours flew by between pots, baking sheets, and bowls. The smell of the dishes took over the environment, and I felt a silent pride in seeing the team working well, in harmony. Leonard appeared to check and, smiling, told me, "Everything is under control. You did this." Those words echoed like music in my ears. Me? Capable? Yes. For the first time, yes. I was capable. I looked around and saw faces that before just passed unnoticed and now worked side by side with me. Each one with their story, their pain, their will to contribute. That night wasn't just about food. It was about dignity, restarting, and belonging. I, Martha Reynolds, felt part of something bigger. I wasn't an abandoned lady anymore. I was the leader of a kitchen full of hope. I was exhausted but alive like never before. In the middle of the rush, I heard a buzz at the entrance. Charlotte had just arrived, accompanied by a team of journalists from the local press. My heart raced. "You need to give an interview," she said. I tried to refuse, but she encouraged me with that sweet and firm look. "Your story can inspire other women." The camera was turned on, and I took a deep breath. I spoke about the dish, the team, the event. But I also spoke about the pain, the abandonment, the strength that is born when everything falls apart. I told how I was humiliated for getting seconds and how, today, I served hundreds of them with pride. I got emotional. I saw tears in the reporter's eyes. And I realized right there that my voice could be a bridge. Not just a wound. I could transform a scar into a cure. When I finished, timid applause came from those who were nearby. And a different warmth took over my chest. Charlotte hugged me and said, "This is just the first of many interviews." I smiled, still with wet eyes. I wasn't seeking fame. I just wanted no one else to go through what I went through without knowing there is a way out, that there is a new beginning. My words touched more people than I imagined. Night fell, but the hall was full like never before. Families, young people, the elderly. Everyone came to taste the dishes prepared by us. Compliments came from all corners. Smiles crossed the table. Leonard introduced me as responsible for the menu, and I was applauded. It was strange to be the center of something, after so much time being invisible. But there, in that collective warmth, I felt something similar to peace. At the end of the event, I sat for a moment with my empty platter in my lap. I thought about everything that had happened since that night. I left with another pot in my hands, rejected. Now, instead of humiliation, there was recognition. Instead of doors closing, there were doors opening. I closed my eyes for an instant and thanked in silence for not having given up. Grace sat beside me and hugged me around the shoulders. "You did it," she said. And I knew she was right. I did it, yes. But not alone. The strength came from extended hands, from people who believed when not even I could believe anymore. And now I wanted to give back. I wanted to continue serving not just food but also dignity. That night, I slept with my heart at peace. I was cleaning the restaurant counters when Grace entered with her cell phone in hand. "You were on television again," she said with an amused smile. It was the rerun of the community dinner segment. I laughed, a bit embarrassed but proud. On the other side of the city, in a silent living room, Peter was watching too. I saw later, in online comments, that even colleagues of his had praised the segment. He didn't expect to see me there. They say pride can hurt when the truth confronts us. And that was what I saw in his face, embarrassment. He didn't comment to anyone, but his colleagues noticed. I saw in a discreet post, "When your mom becomes a TV highlight and you didn't even know." Someone tagged him. Peter, always so proud, couldn't ignore it anymore. And for the first time, maybe he was feeling something similar to regret. While I went about my day, unaware of these details, he picked up his cell phone and typed my number. It rang, but I didn't answer. It rang again. I ignored it. Not because I wanted to hurt him, but because it still hurt. His voice still echoed, saying that I was a burden, a nuisance. How to forget that? How to pretend everything could go back to how it was before? I couldn't. His face turned red when he saw my name on the screen. 2 days later, he appeared. I entered the kitchen and there he was, standing with his body shrunk, as if that environment intimidated him. His eyes searched for me with a mixture of shame and expectation. Nobody said anything for a few seconds. Only the sound of the restaurant operating in the background. My heart beat faster, but my face remained serene. He said, "Mom, can we talk?" The words came hesitantly, like someone afraid of being rejected. I didn't know how to respond. I was in the middle of my routine, surrounded by people who now were part of my new life. His presence there seemed out of place, like a piece of an old puzzle that didn't fit anymore. Leonard looked at me from afar, respecting my space. Grace by my side just held my elbow lightly. Peter didn't insist. He just remained there with that look of a lost boy, as if he wanted to go back in time. I wanted to hug him, but I also wanted to scream. I wanted to forgive, but I also wanted him to feel everything I felt. I took a deep breath and said, "Not now." And I went back to my work. My body was there, but my soul trembled. The past had come back knocking at the door. He was there, standing like a lost boy. That night, Grace sat with me at the kitchen table. We were drinking chamomile tea, like in so many other silent conversations. She looked at me with care and said, "Maybe you should listen to what he has to say. Not for him, but for you." I stayed in silence. She didn't pressure, just offered pass. And I knew that deep down she was right. Not listening was also a way of remaining trapped. She reminded me of how far I had already walked. That forgiveness didn't need to be acceptance or a return, but liberation. I cried softly, not from sadness but from fear. Fear of opening the wound before it was healed. Fear that everything would hurt again. Grace held my hand with affection. "You are not alone," she said. And that strengthened me a little more. In bed, I stayed staring at the ceiling for hours. His words, the silences, the memories. Everything mixed. I didn't know what I would do. But I knew I needed to decide for myself, no longer out of obligations or expectations. For the first time, my life was in my hands, and I wanted to hold it firmly, even trembling, even insecure. I didn't know if I was ready to forgive. When I finally agreed to talk, I scheduled a time when the restaurant was already closed. Peter arrived punctually, with his shoulders slumped and an expression of tiredness. We sat in the back of the kitchen, near the boxes of supplies. He took a deep breath before starting. "Mom, I lost my job. Emily and we separated. She left me, took what she could." His look was an empty well. I continued in silence, listening. He said he tried to keep up appearances, but the debts accumulated. Friends drifted away. The shame grew. "Now I know what it's like to be ignored, treated like a burden." His words hit me like an inverted mirror. The son who one day told me to leave his house, now saw himself rejected. Life had taken turns he never imagined. He wasn't crying, but his eyes were wet. He tried to keep firm, but his voice faltered. "Mom, I was cruel to you. I didn't know how to see. I was weak, and I let her push you away from me." I listened to everything with a tight chest. Part of me wanted to touch him, comfort him, but another part was still bleeding. The words spoken that night still hurt. They weren't erased with regret. Now he knew what it was to be discarded. Peter held my hand, something he hadn't done since he was a child. "I wanted you to come back, to live with me again. We can start over." My body froze. It wasn't just about him, it was about everything I had built since then. And for the first time, I looked into his eyes firmly and said, "I no longer intend to live for others. I rediscovered a part of myself here." He stayed silent, as if that answer wasn't what he expected. I continued. "For years, I annulled myself to serve. Now I serve by choice, not by obligation. And I wanted to stay that way." Peter didn't seem to understand immediately, but I couldn't go back to that version of me that accepted everything in the name of love. Now I knew. True love doesn't require us to disappear. He tried to argue, but I raised my hand gently, asking him to let me finish. "I can love you, Peter, but I can also love myself. And that isn't selfishness. It is respect." He lowered his eyes. The truth was hard but necessary. I needed to say it. For him. For me. So that I would never again go back to the place where I diminish myself for affection. "I can love you, but I can also love myself." Peter left in silence. He walked to the door slowly, as if he wanted to say more, but without courage. Before leaving, he looked back one last time. I just nodded my head, like someone acknowledging the other's pain, but choosing not to carry it. He closed the door with care, without the bang of other goodbyes. And I stayed there, sitting with a restless heart. Grace entered a few minutes later and said nothing. She just sat beside me. I leaned my head on her shoulder and took a deep breath. It hurt. It hurt a lot. But it also liberated. Because for the first time I said no. Not out of revenge, but out of self-love. Not because I didn't love him, but because I learned to prioritize myself. The night was cold, but inside me there was a spark of peace. I knew that this would be a definitive step in my journey. Peter would need to find his own strength now. I had found mine, and that changed everything. This time I was the one who turned my back. The hall was decorated with simple, colorful flowers. It was the biggest event of the year at the community restaurant, and to my surprise they said I would be honored. Leonard gave a beautiful speech. Charlotte and Grace were radiant. The patrons applauded me standing up, and my name was repeated with joy and gratitude. It was as if, finally, my existence had gained public value. I felt tears accumulate, but I maintained my posture. Receiving love like that was new to me. I always served backstage, without expecting recognition. But on that day, everyone was there for me. I took off my apron, put on a simple dress, and walked to the center of the hall. Applause echoed around me, and for an instant I allowed myself to smile. But then, among so many faces, I saw something that made me freeze. Peter. At the back of the hall, with teary eyes and hesitant posture. He was dressed simply, different from the confident man he used to be. My heart raced. Why was he there? What did he expect to find? Leonard, who noticed my look, just nodded discreetly, like someone who knew that moment was inevitable. And suddenly time seemed to have stopped. Applause echoed, but a face in the crowd disconcerted me. Peter asked to speak. Leonard, respectful, yielded the microphone. The hall went silent. I am Peter Reynolds, Martha's son. His tone was firm, but his face betrayed the emotion. He spoke of everything that happened, of the shame, of the regret. He said he didn't come to apologize in secret, but in front of everyone so that the world would see who he was, and who his mother is. The words went through me like arrows and balm at the same time. The audience was in absolute silence. Some cried. Others observed with empathy. He knelt and said, "Mom, I rejected you. Today I recognize the incredible woman you have always been. If there is still space in your heart, forgive me." My entire body trembled. Not from doubt, but from the weight of the choice placed before me. Could I erase everything? Start over as if nothing had been said? I looked at him, then at everyone around. I saw Grace clasping her hands in her lap, Charlotte cheering discreetly. I closed my eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. When I opened them, I spoke clearly. "Peter, I forgive you." A collective sigh ran through the room. But I continued. Forgiving is different from going back. And in that instant, the woman I was said goodbye once and for all to the woman I am now. Forgiving is different from going back. I hugged my son with tenderness but without promise. He understood. We stayed a few seconds in silence, mother and son trying to recognize each other again. Afterward, I turned to the audience and gave thanks. I said that the restaurant gave me back my dignity, but it was the pain that taught me to love myself. I said that we don't need great deeds to be important, only courage to start over. Charlotte hugged me tight and Grace whispered, "You made the right choice." I knew that. Peter remained there, but now as part of the audience, no longer as the center of my world. My place was elsewhere. My life was different. And although there was forgiveness, there was no return. It was necessary to move forward with lightness and awareness. I returned to the center of the hall, where a new tribute was beginning. Not for being a mother, wife, or ex-guest, but for being Martha. For everything I overcame, for everything I faced. And in that instant, the woman who was once silenced rose before the world. Without fear. Without guilt. Just whole. And for the first time, I was the one who said goodbye. It was during a quiet morning while cutting vegetables that the idea arose. How many women pass through this restaurant carrying stories of pain, abandonment, and new beginnings? And how many like me didn't know where to start? I spoke with Leonard, then with Charlotte and Grace. I proposed a cooking course for women in vulnerable situations. But it wouldn't just be about recipes, it would be about reclaiming identity. We organized the first meetings with care, adapting the space and the times. The first students arrived shy, suspicious. I saw myself in them. That's why I made a point of cooking with my heart, as always. Each dish came accompanied by a story. Of childhood, of overcoming, of love. Soon the environment transformed into something more. A circle of healing, an exchange of pains and hopes. The classes grew. Single mothers came, abandoned elderly women, young women without direction. And every week more voices were added to our little revolution. I wasn't just Martha the cook anymore. I was a mentor counselor bridge. The women started looking for me outside of class, bringing doubts, confessions, requests for advice. And each one of them reminded me of who I was and who I chose to be. Each recipe had a little bit of my story. Grace became the project coordinator. Charlotte, our guide and emotional arm. Together, we structured the course into 3 phases: technical, emotional, and community. We started establishing partnerships with local bakeries and restaurants. Some students already got their first jobs. Others started selling food from home. All, without exception, left different from how they entered. Our project started gaining notoriety. The press returned, but now focusing on the collective transformations. A journalist wrote, "What started with a second helping turned into a banquet of new beginnings." I cried reading that, because it was true. My pain was not in vain. My past finally served to help someone not give up on their own future. Charlotte hugged me after a meeting and said, "You transformed your story into a movement." And Grace completed, "And made us believe that every woman has a place." Those words warmed me inside. I never imagined being that type of reference. But I was. Because I fought for myself when no one else would. And now I did it for so many others. They weren't alone, and neither was I. In recent months, the restaurant underwent renovations and now is also an official community center. Classrooms, professional kitchen, social space. I walk through there calmly, greeting every new face with a true smile. I no longer carry shame nor silence. Only stories, memories, and lots of love. I see the women preparing their dishes, testing seasonings, laughing between mistakes and successes. Sometimes they call me to taste something, sometimes just to listen. And I listen with the patience I wish they had had with me. Time taught me that what heals the most isn't what we do, it's how we look at the other. And I learned to look with welcome. At the end of the day, I sit on the wooden bench near the big stove and take a deep breath. That space has seen me fragile, broken, invisible. Now it sees me whole, present, necessary. I don't need to prove my worth anymore. I am my own worth. And every woman who passes through there takes with her a piece of my story and leaves a little of hers in me. I entered there with a broken heart. Today I am whole. Now I am curious about you who heard my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you gone through something similar? Support the channel. Subscribe, like, comment, and share this video. I am leaving on the end screen another story that you will also like, and it will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until the next video.